Hello, everyone. My name is Odin Nunson, and I'm here to talk to you about 8 historical queer figures because, despite what many people will tell you, queerness is something that's existed for most of human history. Arguably longer. Who knows? The dinosaurs might have been a little fruity too. But to kick things off, we're going to be starting with one of the most famous Greek poets of all time, Sappho of Lesbos. Born 620 BCE and died around 570, she was a poet from ancient Greece of some renown, although much of her work has been lost, sadly. Only 650 lines have survived to the modern day. Sappho was born on the island of Lesbos in the Aegean Sea, which is off the coast of Greece, and, as one might have guessed, her name is the origin of the word sapphic, and directly because of her, the word lesbian changed from being a geographic identifier to being a term used to describe women who are attracted to women. Sappho was so famous that coins on Lesbos were minted with her face, despite not being a ruler or a leader of her island. And according to historian Suzanne McAllister, Sappho is the first extant Greek poet to write expressly about the feeling generated by love. Moving on from poetry to music, we have Freddie Mercury, born in 1946 in modern-day Tanzania, under the original name of Farrokh Bulsara. Freddie Mercury was a member of the band Queen, and they released their first record of the same name in 1973. He was lead writer and vocalist for the band, and while he kept his sexuality hidden from the public, he challenged heterosexual normality with his behavior and music by refusing to compromise himself. Freddie Mercury performed at Live Aid, a charity concert where they were raising money to supply a famine struck Ethiopia with food. Freddie Mercury has a somewhat complicated legacy. His bisexuality is often downplayed in favor of a purely homosexual interpretation of his life. However, something that many people may not realize, he had multiple relationships with both men and women. Freddie Mercury was bisexual. He was a bicon, if you will. However, sadly, he died in 1991 due to complications from AIDS, and posthumously appeared in Queen's 1995 album, Made in Heaven. Moving on from poetry and music to the concept of war, we have Baron von Steuben, who is both gay and European. Born in 1730 in Prussia, now modern-day Germany, Friedrich Wilhelm Augustus von Steuben would go on to serve with distinction in the Prussian military during the 7 Years' War in the infantry as a staff officer and the general staff in Prussia and Russia. He was discharged from the military in 1763 for unknown reasons, though possibly for sexuality. There were many allegations of him being a gay man circulating around Europe and the colonies, but despite having heard of these allegations, George Washington nevertheless welcomed him to the Continental Army to help train the Americans with open arms. And while there, von Steuben revamped the Continental Army by initiating a series of reforms at Valley Forge, including having the latrines on the downhill side of the camp and the kitchens on the opposite end to improve sanitation. Because, hey, who knew? Having the kitchen and the bathroom right beside each other leads to nasty things. Who would have thought? And while there, he introduced vigorous, yet simple, training to the Continental Army to install discipline. Much like a mullet, with business in the front, he was also a partier. Reportedly, Baron von Steuben threw wild, sexually charged parties during his time in the Continental Army. Historians strongly believe that von Steuben entered into a romantic relationship with a fellow soldier named William North, who von Steuben later adopted, which was a common practice among gay men in the 1700s. In an age when sodomy was widely criminalized, Baron von Steuben lived relatively openly as a gay man in the Continental Army and is widely recognized as one of the major factors in American victory in the war. Which, building off this concept, we will move on to yet another figure who was largely responsible for victory in war. And that is Alan Turing. Born in 1912 in England, Turing graduated from University in Cambridge in 1934. Turing helped advance the fields of probability, mathematics, and contributed to the research to probability theory while dabbling in philosophy. Turing joined the government code and cipher school in 1938 before moving to Bletchley Park, headquarters of the organization during World War II. From 1939 to 1940, Turing and other scientists designed the bomb bay, a code-breaking device to help Allied command break Nazi codes after a Polish bomb was rendered useless. In 1942, Turing helped devise the first systematic method for breaking messages sent by the German cipher machine. As a pioneer in artificial intelligence and an early proponent of the idea that human brain is a digital computing machine, Turing continued to have a influence in the post-war world, and in 1951 was elected to the Royal Society. Sadly, the following year, 1952, he was arrested for being homosexual, under the crime of, quote, gross indecency, and was sentenced to 12 months of hormone therapy. Due to his arrest, his criminal record resulted in him no longer being able to work for the government, and he spent the last years of his life working in Manchester, researching biology and theorizing about artificial intelligence. In 1954, he died unexpectedly. 3 possibilities have been listed: suicide, though research suggests he was not in a suicidal state of mind; accidental death from breathing in cyanide fumes from his bedside lab; and murder, because as a homosexual well-versed in code breaking, he may have been seen as a security threat. Despite the fact that Turing helped lead the Allies to victory over the Nazi war machine, he was nevertheless betrayed by his countrymen for his queerness. Being queer was not something that was accepted in the 1950s and would not be accepted by many for much of the 20th century. Keeping with the theme of England, we're going a little further back in time to the late 1300s to Eleanor Rykener, England's mysterious embroiderer. Born as John, all records show that she went by the name Eleanor, though the scribe that recorded her arrest only referred to her by her dead name. Not much is known about her other than the fact that she was an embroiderer and a sex worker. She was arrested on December 11th, 1394 for prostitution. From what historians have been able to glean from medieval records, Eleanor had multiple sexual interactions with both men and women, but appeared to only accept payment from men, suggesting a more personal relationship between them and other women, implying that she was bisexual with a preference for women. Her fate is unknown. It is possible she was released or executed, though there's also a possibility that she was imprisoned in the Tower of London and later escaped, but we don't know for certain. She largely vanishes from the historical record. As of current record, she is the only known legal case regarding same-sex intercourse in late medieval England. Eleanor Rykener, despite so little information being known about her, is extremely important because it shows that trans people have always existed. This person was from the late 1300s and yet was very much a trans person. The idea that trans people didn't exist until the 21st century is complete and utter bunk, and Eleanor Rykener is perfect proof of this. And speaking of trans women, we move on to Marsha P. Johnson. Born in 1945 and the fifth of 7 children, Marsha graduated from Thomas Edison High School in 1963 and later enrolled in the United States Navy. She later moved to Greenwich Village in New York City and became part of the vibrant queer community in the area while working as a prostitute. For her early life and for a period of time in Greenwich when she was still trying to find herself, she continued to go by her dead name of Malcolm and Black Marsha before finally settling on Marsha P. Johnson. The P standing for Pay It No Mind. Marsha P. Johnson was a famous drag queen who was notable for her unique costume designs. As a prominent member of the community, she actively helped homeless and young LGBTQ youth as a motherly figure. She often brought home wayward people to her family to ensure they had a hot meal. During the Stonewall riots, Johnson spoke against police who were harassing the queer patrons during their raid for illegal, unlicensed alcohol on sale and for breaking New York State's gender-appropriate clothing statute. After a Stonewall riot, she co-founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which was dedicated to helping homeless transgender youth. Sadly, Marsha P. Johnson died under mysterious circumstances in 1992. Her body was found by the Hudson River and was ruled a suicide, despite not displaying any suicidal symptoms. However, in 2017, her case was finally reopened. Moving on from Marsha P. Johnson to the other half of the country, we have Harvey Milk. Born in 1930, he was a popular student in high school who had interests all across, including playing football and performing opera. While in high school, he realized he was gay. While at New York State College for Teachers, or modern day State University of New York, he wrote articles challenging discrimination in the world in the aftermath of the Second World War after brutality of the Nazi regime was revealed. He graduated in 1951 and enlisted in the Navy and served as a diving instructor until 1955, when he resigned after being questioned by the military on his sexuality. As a civilian, he worked as a school teacher, a stock analyst, and as a production associate for a number of Broadway musicals, including Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar. By the 1970s, he had become heavily involved in politics and demonstrated against the Vietnam War. He later moved to San Francisco in 1972 and became a fixture of the city's gay community, where he helped found the Castro Village Association, one of the first organizations dedicated to organizing queer-owned businesses, and organized the Castro Street Fair in an effort to attract more customers to the area. In 1975, despite being openly gay, he only narrowly lost the race for San Francisco City Supervisor and was later appointed to the Board of Permit Appeals, making Harvey Milk the first openly gay city commissioner in the United States, which was a major step forward. And in 1977, he won a seat as a San Francisco County Supervisor and was inaugurated in 1978, making nationwide headlines. He was popular with both queer and straight voters, and he backed anti-discrimination bills and established daycares for working mothers and helped defeat a measure that would require the firing of teachers for being gay. Sadly, he was assassinated in 1978 by a man known as Dan White, who was acquitted of the murder on the Twinkie defense and was sentenced to 8 years for manslaughter, not murder. The Twinkie defense was the defense provided by his lawyer, who argued that he was not in a sound state of mind and that he was experiencing depression, and part of the proof of this was the fact that he had stopped eating healthily and started eating more snack foods such as Twinkies. However, Harvey Milk's death inspired thousands to protest unfair treatment, known as the White Night Riots. And to end this, we have Julie d'Aubigné, a bisexual opera-singing and sword-slinging person. Born in the early 1670s, Julie was the only child to the secretary of Count d'Armagnac, the Lord of Horses to King Louis XIV of France. Julie was trained in fencing alongside other men, and from an early age began dressing in men's clothing. In 1687, Julie was married off to Sieur de Malpen, though he left for an administrative duty in southern France and left her in Paris. She left Versailles in the 1680s with her fencing instructor, and the two worked as fencers at fairs and taverns, though the relationship eventually fell apart. d'Aubigné would go on to duel and kill or wound at least 10 men, and she won a royal pardon by arguing that the anti-dueling laws only applied to men, which is pretty ballsy in my opinion. Julie had a relationship with another woman, and when her lover was sent to a nunnery, d'Aubigné reportedly stole the dead body of a nun and placed it in her lover's room before trying to burn down the monastery. For this, she was sentenced to death by the king. However, after hearing her sing, an opera company convinced the king to lift her death sentence so that she could join them, which is amazing. Imagine, one, not only getting the king to pardon you by saying, the law only specifies men, and then later having your death sentence lifted because you sing so perfectly. She's like a D&D character brought to life. Julie became famous as an opera singer under the name of La Malpen, but she was later heartbroken over the death of her lover, Madame la Marquise de Florensac, the most beautiful woman in France, in 1705, and died herself in a convent. I am currently unsure if she tried to burn this one down at all. Julie is important because She broke gender norms. One, as a woman who was sword fighting, she also dressed in men's clothing, showing that she was a cross dresser. And while I have not found any evidence that suggests that she identified as a man, it nevertheless shows that she was certainly bisexual. As a bisexual woman in 1600s France, she broke gender norms in very public ways, making her, I think, valid and important for this list of 8 historical queer figures. If you're still here at the end, I'm glad you stuck around, and I hope you feel at least a little enlightened, and I hope that it better shows that queer people have always been around and has expanded at least someone's knowledge. Until next time, I'm Odin Odinson.